Welcome. Tonight we travel far back in time, thousands of years into the past, to the warm lands of ancient Egypt. As you listen, allow your mind to slow down and relax. There is no need to focus too closely. Simply let the story unfold gently as we explore what everyday life may have felt like for the people who lived along the banks of the Nile River. Imagine a quiet evening settling over a vast desert landscape. The air is warm but calm, and the sun has just dipped below the horizon. A soft golden glow lingers in the sky while the first stars begin to appear. In the distance, the great Nile River flows slowly and steadily, just as it has for thousands of years. The Nile was the heart of ancient Egypt. Without it, the land would have been an endless stretch of desert. But along its banks, the soil was rich and dark, perfect for growing crops. Each year, the river flooded gently, leaving behind fertile mud that made farming possible. Because of this river, villages and towns began to appear along the narrow green strip of land beside the water. Small communities grew, filled with farmers, craftspeople, merchants, and families living simple but meaningful lives. Ancient Egypt lasted for a remarkably long time. Its civilization began more than 5,000 years ago and continued in different forms for thousands of years afterward. During that time, countless generations were born, grew up, worked, raised families, and eventually passed their traditions on to the next generation. When many people think of ancient Egypt, they imagine towering pyramids, golden treasures, and powerful pharaohs. While these things were certainly important, they were only a small part of everyday life. Most Egyptians lived quiet lives centered around farming, family, religion, and the steady rhythm of the Nile. For the average person, daily life was shaped by the seasons of the river. The yearly flooding of the Nile determined when crops were planted, when they were harvested, and when the land rested. Life followed patterns that repeated year after year. Sunrise brought work and activity, while sunset brought rest and quiet. Villages were often made up of simple homes built from mud bricks. These bricks were formed from the same rich mud left behind by the Nile's floods. The houses blended naturally into the landscape, their warm brown colors matching the earth itself. Inside these homes lived families who cooked meals, shared stories, and rested after long days of work in the fields or workshops. Children played along the dusty paths between houses. Farmers tended to crops along the riverbanks. Boats drifted slowly along the Nile, carrying goods, people, and messages between communities. Life moved at a slower pace than the modern world. Without machines or electricity, the daily routine was guided by the natural rhythm of the sun and the seasons. The sun rose each morning over the eastern desert, bringing warmth and light. It traveled slowly across the sky, and by evening it sank behind the western hills. To the ancient Egyptians, this daily journey of the sun was deeply meaningful. They believed the sun god Ra sailed across the sky in a great celestial boat, bringing light to the world each day. At night, when darkness returned, they believed Ra traveled through the underworld before rising again the next morning. These stories helped people understand the natural cycles around them. They connected daily life with the movements of the heavens and the mysteries of the universe. As we continue our journey tonight, we will step deeper into this ancient world. We will explore the fertile lands along the Nile, the homes and villages where people lived, the foods they ate, the work they performed, and the traditions that shaped their lives. Each part of daily life in ancient Egypt reveals something about the people who lived there, their resilience, their beliefs, and their quiet connection to the land that sustained them. So, now allow your mind to drift gently along the Nile River, where our journey into the daily life of ancient Egypt truly begins. The Nile River was more than just a source of water. It was the lifeline of the entire Egyptian civilization. Stretching over 4,000 miles, the Nile is one of the longest rivers in the world. But for the people of ancient Egypt, the most important part of the river was the narrow strip of fertile land that followed its winding path through the desert. On both sides of the Nile lay vast expanses of dry sand and rocky hills. These deserts were harsh and difficult to cross. But along the river itself, life flourished. Each year the Nile flooded during the late summer months. The water rose slowly and gently, spilling out across the nearby fields. At first glance, a flood might seem dangerous, but for the ancient Egyptians, this yearly event was a blessing. As the water spread across the land, It carried with it rich black soil from far upstream. When the floodwaters finally receded, they left behind a layer of fertile mud, perfect for growing crops. This natural process made farming possible in a land that would otherwise have been barren. Because the floods happened regularly each year, farmers could plan their lives around them. The Egyptian calendar was even divided into 3 seasons based on the river's behavior. The first season was the flooding season, when the Nile covered the fields. The second season was the planting season, when farmers sowed their crops into the soft soil. The third season was the harvest season, when the crops were gathered and stored. Villages were often built slightly above the floodplain, so homes would remain safe when the water rose. From these villages, farmers could walk or travel by boat to their fields each day. Boats were incredibly important in Egypt. The Nile served as the main highway connecting cities and communities. Simple wooden boats carried grain, livestock, pottery, and building materials up and down the river. Fishermen cast nets into the water, hoping to catch fish that would provide food for their families. Children may have played along the riverbanks, watching boats pass by and listening to the gentle sounds of water moving against the shore. The river was also a place of beauty. Tall reeds and papyrus plants grew along the edges of the water. Birds nested among the tall grasses, and animals came to drink at the river's edge. In the early morning, a thin mist sometimes rose from the water as the sun began to warm the land. For many Egyptians, the Nile was deeply sacred. It represented life, renewal, and stability. Without it, their civilization would never have existed. And so, each day as people worked along its banks, they remained aware of the quiet power of the river that made their lives possible. Farming was the most common occupation in ancient Egypt. Most people spent their days working the land, growing crops that would feed their families and support the kingdom. The fertile soil left behind by the Nile's floods allowed a wide variety of crops to grow successfully. The most important crops were wheat and barley. These grains were used to make bread and beer, 2 of the most common foods in the Egyptian diet. Bread was baked daily in many homes. The dough was often made by grinding grain into flour, mixing it with water, and baking it in clay ovens. The bread might be shaped into small round loaves or simple flat pieces. Beer was also a staple drink. It was thick and nutritious, sometimes containing bits of grain that added extra flavor. Besides wheat and barley, farmers also grew vegetables such as onions, garlic, cucumbers, and lettuce. Dates and figs grew on trees, providing sweet fruits that could be eaten fresh or dried for later. In some areas, farmers grew flax, a plant used to make linen cloth. The work of farming followed the seasons of the Nile. After the floodwaters receded, farmers prepared their fields by breaking up the soil with simple wooden tools. They scattered seeds across the ground and allowed animals such as goats or pigs to walk over the fields, pressing the seeds into the soil. As the crops grew, farmers carefully watched their fields, hoping for a successful harvest. When harvest time arrived, the entire community often helped gather the crops. Bundles of grain were cut using curved tools called sickles. The grain was then separated from the stalks and stored in large granaries to protect it from moisture and pests. Food preparation often took place outside the home in open courtyards. Families cooked meals together, grinding grain, chopping vegetables, and baking bread. Simple meals might include bread, vegetables, fish from the Nile, and sometimes small amounts of meat. For most people, food was simple but nourishing. And after a long day of work under the warm Egyptian sun, even a simple meal could feel deeply satisfying.
Homes and villages. Most Egyptians lived in small villages scattered along the fertile banks of the Nile. These villages were usually built close to farmland, but slightly elevated, so that homes remained safe during the annual flooding season. The houses themselves were simple but practical. Builders used mud bricks made from the rich soil of the Nile, mixed with straw and water. The mixture was shaped into rectangular bricks and left to dry under the hot Egyptian sun. Once hardened, these bricks were stacked together to form thick walls that helped keep the interior cool during the heat of the day. Most homes were modest in size. A typical house might contain just a few rooms arranged around a small central space. Roofs were flat and often used as additional living areas, especially during warm evenings. Inside the home, furniture was simple. Wooden stools, low tables, and woven mats were common. Beds were often raised slightly above the ground and made from wooden frames with woven reeds. Cooking usually took place outside or in open courtyards where smoke from fires could escape easily. Villages themselves were quiet and close-knit. Narrow dirt paths wound between houses. Children played in open spaces while neighbors spoke with one another and shared daily tasks. In the distance, fields stretched toward the river, and beyond them the desert waited silently under the bright Egyptian sun. Life in these villages was simple but connected. Everyone depended on one another and on the steady rhythm of the Nile. Work and trades. While farming was the most common occupation, many Egyptians worked in skilled trades. Craftspeople were highly valued in Egyptian society. Their work helped build temples, decorate tombs, and produce tools and goods used throughout the kingdom. Potters shaped clay into jars, bowls, and storage containers. These pottery pieces were used to store grain, water, oil, and other important supplies. Carpenters worked with wood to build furniture, boats, doors, and tools. Because large trees were rare in Egypt, wood was often imported from distant lands. Stone workers carved statues, columns, and building blocks used in temples and monuments. Jewelry makers crafted beautiful pieces using gold, precious stones, and colored glass. Even ordinary Egyptians appreciated decorative objects. Amulets and small pieces of jewelry were believed to bring protection and good fortune. Scribes also played an important role in society. They were among the few people who could read and write. Using brushes made from reeds and ink made from soot and minerals, scribes recorded information on papyrus scrolls. They wrote letters, recorded taxes, documented harvests, and kept official records for the government. Because literacy was rare, scribes held respected positions within Egyptian society. Meanwhile, merchants traveled along the Nile, trading goods between cities and villages. Boats carried grain, pottery, cloth, and other products up and down the river. The river made travel much easier than crossing the harsh desert terrain. Each trade, whether simple or skilled, contributed to the stability of the kingdom. Together, farmers, craftspeople, scribes, and merchants formed the foundation of everyday Egyptian life.
Religion was deeply woven into every part of life in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians believed that many gods and goddesses controlled different aspects of the world. Some gods ruled the sky, others the earth, the rivers, or the afterlife. Temples dedicated to these gods stood throughout the land. Priests cared for the temples and performed rituals meant to honor the gods and maintain harmony in the universe. But religious practices were not limited to temples alone.
They thought that the soul continued to exist in another world after the body died. Because of this belief, great care was taken to preserve the body and prepare for the journey into the afterlife. While elaborate tombs and pyramids were reserved for the wealthy and powerful, ordinary people also hoped for a peaceful afterlife. Daily rituals and quiet prayers helped people feel connected to the divine world that surrounded them. Family was at the center of Egyptian life. Most households included parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives who lived nearby. Children were raised with care and attention. From a young age, they learned the skills needed to help their families. Boys often learned farming or trades from their fathers. Girls learned household skills such as cooking, weaving, and caring for younger siblings. Despite the responsibilities of daily work, there was still time for rest and enjoyment. Children played games using simple toys made from wood or clay. Music was also part of everyday life. People played instruments such as harps, flutes, and drums during celebrations and gatherings. Families shared meals together and often spent evenings talking or resting after long days of work. Marriage was an important milestone. Most people married young and began building families of their own. Husbands and wives worked together to manage the household and support their children. These quiet family routines formed the foundation of Egyptian society. Generation after generation, traditions were passed down, creating a strong sense of continuity through the centuries. Nightfall in ancient Egypt. As evening approached, the intense heat of the day began to fade. The sun slowly descended toward the western horizon, casting long golden shadows across the fields. Farmers returned from their work along the Nile. Boats drifted gently toward village docks. The sounds of the day softened. Cooking fires flickered outside homes as families prepared their evening meals. The sky gradually darkened from gold to deep blue. Stars appeared one by one above the desert landscape. Without electric lights, the night sky of ancient Egypt would have been breathtakingly clear. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a glowing river of stars. Many Egyptians believed the stars were connected to the souls of the departed or the journeys of the gods across the sky. Cooler air settled over the villages. Families gathered together, sharing quiet moments before sleep. Some may have climbed onto the flat roofs of their homes where gentle breezes drifted through the night air. The Nile continued to flow quietly through the darkness, just as it had for thousands of years, and as the world of ancient Egypt slowly drifted into sleep, the steady rhythm of the river remained, calm, constant, and timeless. In the quiet hours of the night, the villages along the Nile became still. The sounds of work faded away, replaced by softer noises. A distant breeze might move through the tall reeds beside the river, creating a gentle rustling sound in the darkness. The Nile itself continued its slow journey northward. Even in the darkness, the river flowed steadily past farms, villages, and temples. For thousands of years it had done the same, bringing life to the land of Egypt. Boats tied along the riverbanks rocked gently with the movement of the water. Fishermen who had worked earlier in the day rested in their homes, preparing to begin again when the sun returned. Above the quiet villages stretched a vast sky filled with stars. Without artificial lights, the night sky in ancient Egypt would have appeared incredibly bright and detailed. Many Egyptians believed the stars were closely connected to the world of the gods. Priests and scholars often watched the night sky carefully, noting how different stars appeared and disappeared throughout the year. These celestial patterns helped them understand the passing of seasons and the timing of important events in Egyptian life. The motion of the stars across the sky helped ancient Egyptians track time. Just as the Nile followed a reliable yearly cycle of flooding and retreat, the heavens moved in patterns that repeated night after night and season after season. Observing these movements gave people a sense of order in the world around them. As the quiet hours of the night continued, cool desert air drifted gently across the land. The intense heat of the day had faded, replaced by a calm stillness. Fields that had once been filled with workers now rested peacefully beneath the starlit sky. Gradually, the darkest hours of the night began to pass. In the far distance, the eastern horizon slowly brightened. At first it was only a faint change in color, barely noticeable against the darkness. But slowly, the coming sunrise announced itself. For the people of ancient Egypt, the rising sun held deep meaning. Each morning the sun climbed slowly above the eastern horizon, spreading light across the Nile and the surrounding fields. Egyptians believed the sun god Ra traveled across the sky in a celestial boat, bringing warmth and life to the world. His daily journey symbolized renewal, reminding people that every sunrise marked the beginning of another cycle of life along the river. As the first light of dawn spread across the land, villages along the Nile slowly began to wake. Farmers stepped outside their homes and looked toward the fields that awaited them. The cool morning air felt refreshing after the heat of the previous day. Soon, narrow paths between houses filled with quiet movement as people began preparing for another day of work beside the river. Boats tied along the riverbanks were gently untied as fishermen and traders prepared to travel along the Nile. The river served as Egypt's main road, connecting villages and cities along its long winding path. Wooden boats drifted slowly with the current, carrying baskets of grain, pottery, woven cloth, and other goods needed by communities up and down the river. Farmers walked toward their fields carrying simple tools made of wood and stone. These tools had been used for generations, designed to break the soil and prepare it for planting. Along the fertile banks of the Nile, rows of crops stretched across the dark earth, nourished by the rich soil left behind after the river's yearly flood. As the sun rose higher, the land filled with the quiet sounds of daily activity. Workers spoke with one another as they labored in the fields. Children helped with small tasks, learning the responsibilities that would one day become their own. The steady rhythm of work continued hour after hour beneath the bright Egyptian sky. Despite the heat of the sun, life along the Nile continued with remarkable consistency. Farmers tended crops of wheat and barley, while others cared for vegetables such as onions, lettuce, and cucumbers. These foods formed the foundation of the Egyptian diet and provided nourishment for families throughout the year. In nearby villages, craftspeople began their own daily routines. Potters shaped clay into jars and bowls used for storing food and water. Carpenters worked carefully with wood to create tools, furniture, and parts for boats. The skills of these artisans were passed down through generations, allowing communities to produce the goods they needed. Stone workers and builders also played important roles in Egyptian society. Using simple but effective tools, they cut and shaped blocks of stone that would eventually become part of temples, monuments, and tombs. Their careful craftsmanship helped create structures that still stand thousands of years later. Scribes worked in quieter spaces, often inside temples or administrative buildings. They used brushes made from reeds and ink created from natural pigments. Writing on sheets of papyrus, they recorded information about harvests, taxes, trade, and government activities. Their records helped organize the complex society of ancient Egypt. Although only a small portion of the population could read and write, scribes were highly respected. Their knowledge allowed them to preserve important information and communicate messages across great distances along the Nile. Through their work, the events of Egyptian history were carefully documented. Throughout the day, the Nile remained busy with activity. Boats moved steadily along the water, carrying goods and passengers between distant settlements. The river's current helped travelers move north, while sails allowed boats to catch the wind and travel south against the flow. As the sun began to lower in the sky once again, the intense heat slowly faded. Farmers gathered their tools and prepared to leave the fields. Craftspeople finished their work for the day, and boats returned to the riverbanks where families and merchants waited.
Markets and trade along the Nile. As the day continues along the banks of the Nile, the sounds of work slowly blend with the quieter activity of trade and exchange. In many Egyptian towns, small marketplaces begin to gather during the late morning hours. These markets are not large or crowded like modern cities, but they form an important part of everyday life. Merchants arrive carrying baskets, pottery jars, woven cloth, or bundles of grain. Some travel by foot along dusty paths between villages. Others arrive by boat, guiding their vessels gently towards small docks or sandy riverbanks where people gather. Trade in ancient Egypt often happened through barter rather than coins. Instead of paying with money, people exchanged goods for other goods. A farmer might trade a basket of barley for a piece of pottery. A fisherman might exchange freshly caught fish for vegetables grown by a neighbor. The marketplace becomes a place where many small conversations happen throughout the day. People greet one another, discuss the success of recent harvests, and share small pieces of news from nearby communities. Potters display rows of clay jars used for storing oil, water, or grain. Woven baskets sit nearby, filled with dates, onions, or garlic harvested from nearby fields. The smell of food sometimes drifts through the air as small cooking fires burn beside the market area. Someone may be preparing flat bread or roasting fish caught from the river earlier that morning. Despite the simple appearance of these markets, they play an important role in Egyptian life. Trade allows goods to move between different villages, making sure that people have access to the tools, food, and materials they need. Boats on the Nile help make this exchange possible. Because traveling through the desert is difficult, the river becomes the easiest path connecting settlements across Egypt.
Merchants load their boats with goods and travel slowly along the water. Sometimes they move north with the current. At other times they raise simple sails and allow the wind to push them south against the river's flow. In this way, the Nile becomes more than just a source of water. It becomes the main road of Egypt, quietly carrying people, ideas, and goods through the civilization that has grown along its banks.
Clothing and daily appearance. Clothing in ancient Egypt was simple, practical, and well suited to the warm climate of the region. Because temperatures were often high during the day, people preferred light and breathable fabrics. The most common material used for clothing was linen. Linen was made from the fibers of the flax plant, which grew well in the fertile soil near the Nile. After harvesting flax plants, workers soaked the fibers in water and carefully separated them into thin strands. These strands were then woven together on simple looms to create linen cloth. The result was a soft and lightweight fabric that allowed air to move easily, helping people stay comfortable in the heat. For many ordinary Egyptians, clothing consisted of simple linen garments. Men often wore short skirts or kilts tied around the waist. Women typically wore longer linen dresses that fit closely to the body. Children often wore very little clothing when they were young, especially during the hottest parts of the year. Although clothing was simple, appearance still held cultural importance. Many Egyptians took great care in maintaining personal cleanliness. Bathing was common, and scented oils were sometimes used to keep skin from drying out under the desert sun. Jewelry was also popular across many levels of society. Necklaces, bracelets, and rings made from copper, beads, or colored stones were worn by both men and women. Some pieces of jewelry also served as protective amulets. These small objects were believed to guard the wearer against illness, danger, or misfortune. Even in ordinary villages, people appreciated beauty and decoration. Simple clothing might be paired with carefully crafted jewelry that reflected both personal taste and cultural tradition. Midday rest and the heat of the sun. By the middle of the day, the Egyptian sun often becomes extremely intense. The bright light reflects off the desert sands, and the air grows hot and dry. Because of this heat, many people adjust their routines to include periods of rest during the warmest hours. Farmers may pause their work and seek shade beneath simple shelters or palm trees growing near irrigation canals. Craftspeople step away from their workshops for a short break, allowing both themselves and their tools to cool. In villages, activity slows noticeably as the midday heat settles across the land. Some people return to their homes briefly to eat a simple meal and rest before continuing their work later in the afternoon. Inside mud brick houses, thick walls help block much of the sun's heat. The interiors remain cooler than the outside air, creating a quiet and comfortable place to rest. During these peaceful hours, the sounds of the village soften. The busy movements of morning fade into a slower rhythm. Only occasional footsteps or distant voices break the stillness of the afternoon. Meanwhile, the Nile continues flowing steadily nearby, its waters reflecting the bright sunlight as it moves gently through the land of Egypt. Egyptian festivals and celebrations. While daily life in ancient Egypt was often centered around work and routine, the calendar also included special moments of celebration. Festivals were important events that allowed communities to pause their labor and take part in shared traditions that had existed for generations. Many Egyptian festivals were connected to religion. Temples dedicated to the gods often organized large ceremonies where priests performed rituals meant to honor divine forces that governed the world. During these festivals, statues of the gods were sometimes carried out from the temples and placed on decorated boats or platforms. These processions moved slowly through the streets while people gathered to watch and celebrate. Music played an important role in these events. Musicians used instruments such as harps, flutes, and drums to create rhythmic sounds that echoed through the villages and temple courtyards. Singers joined in as well, performing songs that praised the gods and told stories about ancient myths. The music, combined with the movement of the crowd, created an atmosphere that was both joyful and deeply meaningful. For many ordinary Egyptians, festivals provided rare opportunities to relax and spend time with neighbors and family members. Work in the fields paused temporarily while communities gathered together. Food was often shared during these celebrations. Bread, fruits, vegetables, and sometimes roasted meats were prepared in larger quantities than usual. Families sat together and enjoyed meals while watching the activities taking place around them. Some festivals lasted only a single day, while others continued for several days at a time. During these longer celebrations, travelers from nearby towns might arrive by boat along the Nile to participate. The river itself often became part of the celebration. Decorated boats drifted along the water carrying musicians, priests, and sacred statues from temple to temple.
To the people of Egypt, these events reinforced their connection to the gods and to one another. They reminded communities that life was not only about work but also about tradition, belief, and shared experience. Even after the celebrations ended, the memories of these gatherings stayed with the people who attended them. The songs, the sounds of drums, and the sight of temple processions would remain part of the cultural memory of the village.
Evening life along the Nile. As the sun begins to set once again over the Egyptian landscape, the intense heat of the day gradually fades. Long shadows stretch across the fields, and the sky slowly shifts through shades of gold, orange, and deep red. Farmers return from the fields carrying their tools. Boats drift quietly toward the shore after a day spent traveling along the river. The sounds of work slowly give way to quieter moments of rest. In villages along the Nile, cooking fires begin to appear one by one. Thin trails of smoke rise into the evening air as families prepare their meals. Bread is baked in clay ovens, and simple dishes are prepared using vegetables, grains, and fish caught from the river earlier in the day. The smell of food spreads gently through the narrow paths between homes. Children finish their games and return to their families as darkness slowly approaches. For many Egyptians, evening is one of the most peaceful times of the day. The air grows cooler, and the harsh brightness of the sun is replaced by softer light. Families gather together to eat and talk about the events of the day. Stories are shared, and plans for the following morning are quietly discussed. Some people climb onto the flat roofs of their homes where the breeze moves more freely. From these rooftops they can watch the sky slowly darken as the first stars begin to appear. The Nile reflects the fading colors of the sky, turning shades of deep blue and silver as night approaches. Birds that spent the day along the riverbanks settle into the reeds for the night. The sounds of the village grow quieter as the hours pass. Eventually the sky fills with stars once again, just as it has for thousands of years above the Egyptian desert. The steady flow of the Nile continues through the darkness, moving calmly past fields, villages, and temples.
And as the land of Egypt slowly drifts into sleep beneath the night sky, the quiet rhythm of the river remains, constant, timeless, and unchanged.
Temples in everyday Egyptian life. Temples stood at the heart of many Egyptian towns and cities. These structures were not only places of worship, but also centers of community activity and cultural life. Large stone walls surrounded temple complexes, protecting sacred spaces dedicated to the gods. Inside these temples, priests performed daily rituals intended to maintain harmony between the divine world and the human world. Egyptians believed that if the gods were properly honored, the natural order of the universe would remain balanced. Priests washed statues of the gods, offered food and incense, and recited prayers that had been spoken for generations. These rituals followed careful routines that rarely changed. Although ordinary people did not always enter the most sacred parts of temples, they still gathered nearby during festivals and special ceremonies. Temples became places where communities came together to witness religious events. Many temples also served practical purposes. They stored grain, kept written records, and sometimes operated workshops where craftsmen created statues, tools, and decorative objects. Because of this, temples played an important role not only in spiritual life but also in the daily functioning of Egyptian society. Learning and education. Education in ancient Egypt was not available to everyone, but it played an important role for those who pursued certain professions. Boys who showed promise might be trained as scribes, one of the most respected occupations in Egyptian society. Young students learned to read and write using hieroglyphic symbols. These symbols represented sounds, objects, and ideas. Learning them required patience and long hours of practice. Students wrote on pieces of papyrus or smooth wooden boards using brushes made from reeds. Their ink was made from natural pigments mixed with water. Teachers often had students copy texts repeatedly in order to memorize writing patterns and improve their handwriting. Becoming a skilled scribe could take many years of practice, but it offered opportunities that most Egyptians did not have. Scribes worked in government offices, temples, and construction projects. They recorded harvest amounts, tracked taxes, and documented important events. Because they could read and write, scribes helped organize many aspects of Egyptian life. Transportation and travel. Although many Egyptians spent their entire lives near the villages where they were born, travel was still an important part of the civilization. The Nile River served as the primary route for transportation across Egypt. Boats carried people and goods between distant settlements along the river. Travel by land was much more difficult. The surrounding deserts were harsh and often dangerous, making long journeys challenging without proper preparation. For this reason, most long-distance travel happened on the water. Boats were built from wood and sometimes reinforced with rope or plant fibers. Some vessels relied on the river's current to move north, while others used large square sails to catch the wind when traveling south. These boats carried everything from grain and livestock to stone blocks used in construction. Through this steady movement of goods and people, communities along the Nile remained connected. The rhythm of the seasons. Life in ancient Egypt was shaped by the rhythm of the Nile's seasonal flooding. The Egyptian year was divided into 3 main seasons. The first season was the flooding season. During this time, the Nile overflowed its banks and spread across nearby farmland. Although the fields temporarily disappeared underwater, the flooding brought valuable nutrients to the soil. The second season was the planting season. After the waters receded, farmers returned to their fields to sow seeds in the rich soil left behind by the flood. The third season was the harvest season. During these months, crops matured and were gathered by workers using simple tools. This repeating cycle guided the entire agricultural calendar of Egypt. Because the Nile flooded reliably year after year, farmers could plan their work with confidence. Evening reflection along the Nile. As another day comes to a close along the Nile, the landscape gradually grows quiet again. The golden light of the setting sun stretches across the fields, and the air begins to cool. Farmers return to their homes after long hours of work. Boats drift slowly toward the riverbanks where they will remain tied until morning. Cooking fires appear in small courtyards as families prepare their evening meals. The smell of bread baking in clay ovens drifts through the village. Children finish their games and gather near their families as darkness slowly approaches. The sky turns deeper shades of blue and purple as the sun disappears beyond the horizon. Soon the stars appear once again above the Egyptian desert. Just as they have for thousands of years, the Nile continues flowing quietly through the land. Its steady movement reminds those who live beside it that life, like the river, moves forward in calm and continuous cycles. Night watch and the quiet hours of ancient Egypt. As the evening settles fully into night, the villages along the Nile become calm and still. The warmth of the day fades slowly, replaced by cooler desert air that drifts gently across the land. The sounds that filled the fields earlier in the day have faded, leaving behind only quiet movements and soft natural rhythms. Cooking fires begin to dim as families finish their meals. Clay ovens cool gradually while the final pieces of bread are shared among those gathered together. Conversations grow softer as the night deepens, and many people begin preparing for sleep. Some families rest inside their homes, while others climb the flat rooftops that sit above their mud brick houses. These rooftops provide cooler air and a clear view of the sky. From here, people can watch the stars appear one by one as darkness spreads across the landscape. The sky above ancient Egypt would have been remarkably clear. Without modern lights or buildings blocking the view, the stars shine brightly across the heavens. The Milky Way stretches across the night sky like a pale river of light. To the people of Egypt, these stars held deep meaning. Many believed the heavens reflected the divine order of the universe. Just as the Nile followed its steady path through the land, the stars followed their own predictable journeys across the sky. Priests and scholars often observed these movements carefully. By watching the stars, they could measure time and recognize the changing seasons. These observations helped guide important events such as festivals, religious ceremonies, and agricultural planning. Meanwhile, along the quiet banks of the Nile, the river continues its steady movement through the darkness. The water flows calmly, reflecting faint light from the stars above. Occasionally a boat tied along the shore shifts gently with the current. The wooden hull creaks softly as the water moves beneath it. The reeds and papyrus plants that grow along the riverbank rustle slightly in the night breeze. Birds that spent the day searching for food now rest quietly among the tall grasses. In some places, guards keep watch near temples or important buildings. Their task is simple but important: to ensure that the village remains safe during the quiet hours of the night. These guards walk slowly through the streets, listening for unusual sounds. Most nights remain peaceful, and their patrols pass without interruption. The moon sometimes rises over the desert horizon, casting pale silver light across the fields. Under this gentle glow, the landscape takes on a different appearance. The edges of temples and distant hills appear softer, and the sand reflects the moonlight in subtle shades of gray and white. For travelers moving along the Nile at night, this moonlight can be helpful. Boats sometimes continue their journeys under the stars, guided by the river's current and the familiar patterns of the sky above. Merchants traveling between cities may prefer the cooler temperatures of nighttime. The calm waters of the Nile allow their boats to glide quietly through the darkness. Farther away from the villages, the desert stretches outward in vast silence. The sand dunes and rocky hills remain unchanged, shaped slowly by wind and time. Despite the stillness of the night, life continues quietly across the land. Animals move cautiously through the desert landscape. Small creatures search for food among the rocks and sand while avoiding predators that hunt under the cover of darkness. Back in the villages, the rhythm of breathing and quiet sleep fills the homes along narrow streets. Families rest after long days of work in the fields, workshops, and markets. The steady flow of the Nile remains a constant presence beside them. For thousands of years, the river has followed this same path through Egypt. It has witnessed countless generations living, working, celebrating, and resting along its banks. Long before the pyramids were built, the Nile flowed through this land. Long after they were completed, the river continued moving quietly past them. Its calm and steady motion connects the lives of people across centuries of history. As the night continues, the stars slowly shift across the sky. Hours pass almost unnoticed in the peaceful darkness. Eventually, the faintest signs of morning begin to appear far in the east. The horizon slowly lightens, signaling that another day is approaching. Soon the sun will rise again over the land of Egypt, beginning another cycle of life along the Nile. Farmers will return to their fields. Boats will travel along the river. Craftspeople will resume their work in villages and towns. But for now, in these final quiet hours before dawn, the land rests peacefully beneath the stars. The river flows calmly through the darkness. The desert air moves gently across the fields. And the ancient world of Egypt drifts quietly through the night, waiting for the next sunrise.